In this lesson, we're going to proceed into section 1.2 of the McCloskey book, titled Income in the Budget Line, and we'll be talking about two things today. The first is the difference between nominal and real income, and secondly, we'll discuss the income effect. So let's start out now by talking about the difference between nominal and real income. Nominal income is the traditional interpretation of income. So, suppose I'm a janitor working at a school in rural Appalachia. If I'm making $50,000 a year, then my nominal income is simply $50,000. Suppose instead that I'm an investment banker in New York City, making $150,000 a year. Then my nominal income is simply $150,000. Let's consider instead the concept of real income. Real income is the purchasing power of nominal income. It's how much you can buy with your nominal income. That's what we really care about. What's important about money is not being able to flaunt lots of it all around your house. What's important about money is that you can buy lots of things with it. So, in Appalachia, the cost of living is quite low. So $50,000 is going to go a long way. So my real income for the janitor in Appalachia is going to be quite high. But in New York City, to get a coffee, you have to pay $6, $7. Nothing is cheap in New York City. Cost of living is really high, so even with $150,000 in your pocket, you might feel quite poor. So, in New York City, my real income may be actually kind of low. We always have to consider real income along with nominal income. Now that we've discussed nominal and real income, let's discuss it in the context of budget lines. Here we have two budget lines for books and apples. There's this blue one, and there's a red one. So, under the red budget line, it's clear that your real income is greater, because you're able to buy more things in this region than you are when faced with the blue budget line. But what is going on underneath with the nominal incomes and the relative prices and the absolute prices when we move from the blue budget line to the red budget line? It turns out that there are two equivalent ways in which we can interpret a movement from the blue budget line to the red budget line. The first one is perhaps more intuitive. In this one, the absolute prices remain constant, and therefore the relative prices remain constant. We always need relative prices to remain constant in this type of move, because otherwise the slopes of these two budget lines would be different, and as we can see in this movement, the slopes of the two budget lines are the same. And finally, we would require that the nominal income increases. It goes up. So the reason that this interpretation leads to a real income increase is the following. If the relative price and absolute prices stay the same, and my nominal income, the amount of money that I have, simply increases, then because I have more money, I can use that additional money to buy more things. The second interpretation is a bit different from the first one. In this interpretation, the relative prices stay the same as before, otherwise our budget lines would have different slopes. However, as opposed to the first interpretation where absolute prices stayed the same, in this interpretation, the absolute prices both decrease proportionally for apples and books in such a manner that keeps the relative prices the same. Finally, as opposed to the previous interpretation where nominal income increased, in this interpretation, nominal income stays the same. Now this interpretation, while being less intuitive than the last one, gets us to the same result of real income increasing. And the reason for this is, as absolute prices decrease, we're able to get more out of the existing money that we have. So this brings us back to our previous discussion a bit, where if I have $100,000 in New York City versus $100,000 in rural Appalachia, those $100,000 go much further in rural Appalachia where the absolute prices are lesser. It's very interesting that by either interpretation, we get the same result that we want of real income increasing. So while we will be taking the first interpretation as primitive, it would not be incorrect to use the second interpretation. Now that we've developed a good understanding of the underlying process in the shift of a budget line, let's try to answer a trickier question using similar analysis. A poor family has the option of receiving $100 towards housing or $100 in cash. Which do they prefer and why? So pause here and try to answer the question on your own using analysis of budget lines. Okay, to answer this problem, we have to compare the choice set of a family before receiving any sort of help and after receiving help in the form of a housing voucher versus in the form of cash. So in order to compare the poor family's choice sets, we need to draw the budget lines for the case before I receive anything, in the case where I receive $100 towards housing, and in the case where I receive $100 in cash. Okay. In order to figure out which of these cases the poor family is going to prefer, we need to draw the budget lines for both cases and see if we can infer anything from the shape of the budget lines as to which case is preferable to the poor family. So first I just draw a budget line which does not include the $100 housing voucher, nor does it include the $100 in cash. So this is the very poor VP budget line. Next, I consider how the budget line changes when I add in the $100 housing voucher. So here I have $100 worth of housing. Think about what a budget line really represents. Everything under a budget line, as we've usually seen it, is a set of attainable choices. But what exactly is going to be attainable now given our $100 housing voucher? Because we have this $100 housing voucher, we're not going to be able to spend anything less than $100 on housing. This means that everything to the left of $100 worth of housing is no longer attainable. Our budget line is going to have to start from this point. So suppose we spend just $100 on housing. How much would we spend on all other goods? We would spend exactly the amount that we did before when we spend nothing on housing. And the reason for that is we still have that same amount of money left over to spend as we wish to distribute on either all other goods or housing. So our new budget line will be parallel to this one, but will look kind of like this. However, these points are still not going to be attainable. Instead, these are going to be the attainable points right here. If instead of the 100 in housing, we had simply received 100 in cash, there would be more attainable points. We could still choose to purchase $100 or more in housing. However, we would also be able to purchase some of this area with more of all other goods than we could get before, but also less than 100 on housing. So to clean it up a bit, what we're losing out on is this red area when we get the housing voucher as opposed to 100 in cash. So because we have fewer choices in the case where we receive the housing voucher, we assume that the poor family is better off by taking $100 in cash. Despite the answer that we've got into here, I don't want to mislead you into thinking that this is the final answer to this question. Obviously, there's much more analysis that can be done, and in fact, there's an entire field of economics, welfare economics, that is created to answer these kind of questions. Nevertheless, this is an excellent use of budget line analysis. We've been talking for quite a while now about analysis of budget lines, so let's switch it up and start talking about the income effect. So the income effect is simply defined as the effect on consumption of an increase in real income holding relative price constant. So in the corner here, I'll just draw it. What is the effect on consumption of going outwards to a new budget line with the relative price constant between the two budget lines? So we can describe the income effect on a good by calling the good either normal or inferior. So we call a good normal if, as real income increases, relative price is held constant, consumption also increases. And we call a good inferior if, when real income increases, consumption decreases. So which kind of goods are normal and which kind of goods are inferior? Well, let's consider a few. For example, cars. As we get richer, we buy more of them, so these are normal goods. On the other hand, public transportation, as we get richer, we buy less of because it gets substituted by cars. So public transportation is an inferior good. But transportation, on the other hand, is a normal good. In general, broad classes of goods, such as transportation in general, are always normal because as we get richer, we buy more things, and in this case, we have a greater need to travel, so broad classes of goods are always normal. Now, try to answer this tricky question to test your knowledge of the income effect. Is it possible that all goods are inferior? So pause here and try to answer this question. Okay, well, hopefully this question wasn't too tricky because it's got a simple answer. And the answer is no, it is not possible that all goods are inferior. And the reason for this is that if I have more income, relative price is held constant, then in a too-good environment, for example, if I'm spending and consuming less on one good, then I'm going to have more money left over than I did before, and that money is going to have to be spent on the other good, and I'm going to have to buy more of that other good than I did before. So it's going to turn out that at least one good always has to be normal, so it's not possible that all goods are inferior. Okay, well, that's all I'm going to have time for today, constrained as I am by YouTube's 15.5-minute video limit. So, for next time, I'd like you to do exercises 1 through 4, problem 1, and read section 1.2 up to the discussion of the mathematics of budget lines, which we will cover in next time lesson. So I hope you enjoy this lesson, and I'll see you next week.